All right, what's good, everybody? Good evening. Hope everybody's doing all right. Okay, come on in. We're going to have some fun stuff to talk about today. Well, actually, it's not going to be all that fun, but it's necessary, especially with today being a very important day in American history. It won't be a day that people look on favorably, I think, as time goes forward, but got to talk about it. I'm sure you guys saw President Joe Biden's remarks today on the end of the Afghanistan war, so we're going to be talking about that. And we're going to be talking about the media a little bit too, so it'll be good stuff. Good evening, everybody. All right. Now, welcome once again to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer principles over personality and truth over narrative. And if you want to support my work, you know what to do. You can leave me a super chat. That helps. Or if you want to do a one-time donation, this works too. And you can also join my online community at afreshperspective.locals.com. It's only $5 a month with premium content. And you can also please like, share, and subscribe. So like this video, that helps me with the algorithms. Please share it, get more people involved in the conversation. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed, what is going wrong in your life? You need to get in there and subscribe. That way you'll be notified whenever I post a video or whenever I go live. I'm going to be doing some more interviews coming up pretty soon, so I'll keep you posted on that. Also want to remind you, the Solutionary Summit, especially if you happen to be in the Miami area, it's going to be starting this Friday through Saturday, so the 3rd through the 5th. It actually ends on Sunday, for people who get a certain level of ticket. But definitely make sure you're there, because I will be there. I'll be on one of the panels talking about the media with a few other people that you may have heard of, like Lawrence B. Jones from Fox News, the amazing Lucas, Rhonda Mary. It's going to be fire. The whole event's going to be fire. There's going to be tons of different speakers, different panels, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So definitely the link is in the show notes if you want to get your tickets. So also, just want to remind you that LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. Check out LibertyNation.com for all of your conservatarian news, original articles and analysis, videos, podcasts, Liberty Nation Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative Five, all on LibertyNation.com. Conservative news where truth matters. All right. Now, let's go ahead and light this candle, because I've got some stuff to cover. As you know, today is the deadline for our withdrawing of troops from Afghanistan. And pretty much this actually happened yesterday. So we met the deadline. There are no more U.S. troops in Afghanistan. And as you already know, there are some people who have been left behind. We don't know the exact numbers yet. The Biden administration said about 250, could be more than that. These are American nationals. We don't have numbers on Afghan allies and whether or not we were able to extricate them. But suffice it to say, when the numbers do come out, I don't think that they're going to be very pleasant, because we did leave a lot of people behind. And Biden tried to defend himself today during his remarks. And, he talked about, following the deal that Trump made. Here's the thing. This is not Trump's fault. Trump does not share in the blame for the way this withdrawal was handled. Whether or not he had a deal with the Taliban is irrelevant, because the Taliban had already violated the deal. So Biden would have been justified in violating the deal himself. And in a sense, he did, because the deal was we were supposed to be out by May, and he already extended it. So I'm not saying Trump handled Afghanistan perfectly, but I will say that when Trump got into office, we had 15,000 troops there. By the time he left, we had 2,500. And then we ended up having to send more back in because Biden's administration did not plan for this the way that they should. So the only blame I'll give Trump is that he didn't get the job done while he was in office. And he should have, because that was one of his campaign promises. But it is what it is, right? Biden took the helm, and I agree with his decision. I'm glad he's doing this. I will give him credit for making this decision, because I know most people wanted him to do it, but there were still a lot of people who wanted us to stay in Afghanistan forever. And there's a lot of them, and they've been very outspoken. However, this doesn't make up most of the people who have weighed in on this, right? And when it comes to the way the withdrawal was handled, he owns that. Now, I'm going to be going over each of the important blunders that the White House made when setting up this withdrawal and evacuation effort. I'm going to be reading from an article in LibertyNation.com that was written by Dave Patterson. Now, if you watched my interview with him, or a couple weeks ago, I did play some of my interview with him. He's a former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. He served under George W. Bush. He's a decorated Air Force veteran. He's been in the military for a long time. He knows his stuff. And so he's been writing a lot about this. And the article that he put out either today or yesterday was very informative if you want to understand what exactly went wrong here. I don't think I put the link in the show notes yet, but I'll make sure that I do that after I'm done with this live stream. You're going to want to read that article, because I'm not going to quote all of it, but I'm going to hit the salient points. And in this article, he lays out 4 mistakes and missteps that the Biden administration made that contributed to the disaster that this thing was. So the first thing that Patterson brings up was what he calls a, quote, get out of Dodge quick approach with no coordinated military diplomatic strategic objective. So Biden announced on April 14th that the rest of the troops he would be drawing them down starting on May 1st, and the process was supposed to be complete by September 11th. We all remember that, right? That was a symbolic date. But here's what he says. He says, quote, the emphasis was on haste and not thoughtful, coordinated, and safe withdrawal of Americans, civilians first, and then the military on the ground in Afghanistan. This is something that a lot of people have been saying. He didn't get the civilians out first. He didn't get the Afghan allies out first. Now, there was no plan in place, at least on Biden's part, that would have ensured that we got every American civilian who actually wanted to leave out of there. Now, he's saying 90% of the people that they got out, people who wanted to leave, got to leave. I don't know if I believe that. I'll wait for more evidence to come out. At this point, I don't really believe anything that Biden says about this, to be frank. He's already lied about it. I mean, when he talked about not having the intelligence, not understanding that the Taliban would take over as quickly as it did, he made that statement, but then it came out that he was warned. So he's not being truthful here. And I get why, because he has to cover up for his mistakes. But suffice it to say, they were focused just on the drawdown and not how to execute it in a way that would be most efficient. So he did September 11th, and then he said, no, forget the 9/11 date. We're going to get him out by the 31st of August. Now, Patterson says, quote, there was no rationale for the new date. It was arbitrary and self-imposed. And he says, quote, the strategic and sensible approach would have been to establish an operational objective, not a date certain line in the sand. So he's saying that it would have been better for him to say something to the effect of, we're going to leave Afghanistan starting on May 1st, and our mission will be complete when every American and Afghan national that helped us out is actually out of the country. Then he says, quote, we will then redeploy U.S. forces remaining out of Afghanistan. Quote, that would have put the Taliban on notice and defined successful mission accomplishment. And he goes into how U.S. Army Vice Chief of Staff General Jack Keane, he made an appearance with Maria Bartiromo on Fox News, and he said, we said that what the United States policy should be is that we're going to stay in Afghanistan and get all of our people out, regardless of how long it takes. We're not leaving until the mission is complete, and that should have been said at the outset. The August 31st is President Biden's self-imposed deadline, which was so ill-conceived, it caused all of these problems because there's no conditions for it. And he's exactly right. The only condition was we're going to be out by the 31st, regardless of what's happening on the ground, right? And what Patterson, the argument that Patterson is making here makes sense. If it would have been more of an approach as this is how it's going to work. We're going to start drawing people down on May 1st, but we're not going to get our troops out of there until all of our civilians are out, our Afghan allies, the people who want to come. Then our mission is accomplished. Then we get our military out. And by the way, Patterson isn't the only one who's arguing this. This is a point that I've seen brought up over and over again. And for the life of me, I can't understand why the president wouldn't do it this way. He seemed very dogmatic on this, like him and a National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. It's almost like they just felt like just having that deadline was it was going to be conducive to everything running smoothly. And we found out that it wasn't. The civilians should have been our first priority, but it seems that just getting people out by the 31st was our first priority, and that took precedence over removing people who wanted to leave. And when I say the Afghani nationals who leaves, again, I'm talking about the people who helped us. I'm not just saying take every Afghani from the country, because obviously that would be impossible. Or even refugees. I'd actually be okay with that too. I know there's some people on the right who are like, oh, we don't need to take any refugees from Afghanistan. And I'm like, yeah, I think we're okay. It's not going to hurt us to take refugees from this situation. I mean, we helped to cause it, so we are morally obligated. It's funny, my cousin actually sent me a video. I should have played it here, but it was actually from World Star. God, I don't watch World Star like that. I only watch it when he sends me stuff because he's ghetto and he likes to send me that stuff. But it was an interview with this lady, and I think she was probably a Trump supporter or something to that effect. And the interviewer asked her about, how horrible it is that people are being stranded and our allies and all the stuff that's going on. And she got very emotional, got very choked up when she was talking about it. And then he said, well, yeah, I mean, what about all those people who are going to suffer, like our allies? We need to get them over here too. I mean, there's going to be refugees from this. So, shouldn't we be taking in refugees as well? And she was like, she clammed right up, like the tears went, the waterworks went away. She was like, well, I don't know about all that. I'm like, come on. I'm not saying we need to take 1 million Afghani refugees. I'm just saying it's okay to take some. Like, we don't need to be worried about this. I wasn't even going to talk about that, but I just felt like it was worth mentioning. Maybe next time I'll actually play the video because it was very telling. I was like, come on, lady. So the second issue here, the second mistake. So the first one was not having an objective focused plan that was only relying on a deadline. We should have had a plan that relied on we're going to leave when everybody is out who wants to be out. So that was the first issue. Now the second issue was withdrawing our air support that the Afghan forces were relying on, the Afghan army that we propped up. So Patterson writes, quote, the U.S. generally does not engage an enemy on the ground without tactical air support from fighters or Reaper drones overhead. Why would we believe the Afghans would do otherwise? This is something that he and I talked about in our interview. He really emphasized this as one of the biggest mistakes that Biden meant, because if we're going to withdraw air support and not at least have a way for them to be able to fight the Taliban without it, or train them on how to do it, or set up a system where they can rely on it a little bit, or what have you, it was no wonder that they gave up. Now, I remember when Biden gave his first remarks on this a few weeks ago, and he said that the Afghan army laid their arms down. People criticized him for it. I didn't. I defended Biden on that, and I still do, because, again, we can't be fighting a war that they're not willing to fight. But they didn't just give up just because, right? I mean, some of it was that they were being paid by the Taliban. Their commanders were. Some of them were already kind of in league with the Taliban anyway, so there's that. But the other part is that they're not used to fighting these ground wars without air support. They became dependent on it. Patterson writes, the idea that Kabul government's half-dozen Tucano A-29 light air attack aircraft could replace the nearly instant U.S. air power was ludicrous. So this decision not to use air power, at least until we were gone, or at least train the army on how to fight the Taliban without it, it was a bad idea. And the number of troops that they had wouldn't have been enough to take on the Taliban. And here's the thing, that decision wasn't made in August. That decision was made in June by General Frank McKenzie. So these people had been without air support for this long. Now they know that we're leaving. They're like, okay, we don't have air support. We don't have America backing us up. Maybe we should just give up, because if we're either going to die or we're going to get captured and then executed. And neither of those options are very desirable, right? So he says that we shouldn't be surprised that they gave up so easily. He says, quote, when faced with Hellfire missiles and 500-pound laser-guided bombs coming its way, the Taliban has typically disengaged to fight another day. Without the air support, nothing was stopping the Taliban's advance. And that's another thing that he brought up, because even if they made the decision in June to withhold air support, if the Biden administration were supposedly so surprised by how rapidly the Taliban was seizing territory, how they were mopping up capital cities and taking over entire provinces, we could have at least been using air support to at least slow them down so that we would have enough time to get people out. So if you were going to make the first mistake, then if you didn't make the second mistake, it might have still gone okay. But no, we allowed them to take over all this territory without doing anything about it. And here's the thing, like I've said before, the Taliban was always going to take back over once we left. That's not my point of contention here. My point of contention isn't that the Taliban retook power in the first place. It's the fact that we didn't anticipate it or do anything about it to help avoid the situation that we find ourselves in. The only reason why we have to worry about evacuating people is because the Taliban took back over so quickly. If we would have used our air support to slow them down, then that may have mitigated the first mistake in a way that would have allowed us to get everybody out. We probably wouldn't have to worry about those 13 soldiers getting killed, which I'll get to in a second, because they did get killed because of these mistakes. Most likely, they would not have gotten killed if it were done the right way. Now, the third mistake, he says, was relinquishing control of Bagram Air Base. Patterson writes, quote, using both Bagram and the Hamid Karzai International Airport would have provided significantly more capabilities to evacuate American citizens, Afghan nationals that supported the U.S., and foreign nationals wanting to leave. In addition, both U.S. and Allied aircraft could have generated many more sorties into and out of Afghanistan with more ramp space and 3 runways capable of wide-body aircraft versus 1. And he also says that the airbase at Bagram had a defensible perimeter by design, which is different from Hamid Karzai International Airport, where a suicide bomber from ISIS-K made it through the Taliban security lines to kill 13 American service members, and also at least 169 Afghans trying to get out of the country. Now, it sounds, from what I've read, one of the reasons, at least this is what the administration says, or the military says, the reason why they abandoned that base is because they were planning on drawing down troops and they wouldn't have the staffing levels to support the airport. But again, if you've already made the first mistake, and then you've already made the second mistake, then maybe you shouldn't get those staffing out, those people who are staffing those airports out, and continue to have control of both airports. That way you can get people out quicker. So again, you make the first mistake. Oh crap, the Taliban's, they're taking over. Okay, we're not going to use air power for some reason. Well, at least let's hold on to both of these air bases so that we can get people out quicker. So we'll have more planes, more what have you, all that stuff. No, they didn't. And again, that contributed to what we're seeing now. Now, the fourth blunder, and he says that this one is perhaps the most egregious, He writes, quote, "When the Kabul government collapsed on Sunday, August 15th, law and order broke down. Numerous observers reported that armed gangs were moving through the streets. The decision to relinquish the security of Kabul to the Taliban came when a Taliban leader, Abdul Ghani Baradar, he's the leader of the Taliban, one of the founding members, and he described the deteriorating security situation in Kabul. But again, General Mackenzie was at the pointy edge of a very poor decision." Now, there was a meeting that happened between General Mackenzie and Abdul Ghani Baradar, again, leader of the Taliban. Actually, he's the one who's being credited with the fact that the Taliban was able to get back into power so quickly. And in an article in Town Hall, it reports that Baradar told our general, quote, "We have a problem. We have two options to deal with it." And they're referring to all of the lawlessness and the violence happening in Kabul. He says, "You, the U.S., take responsibility for securing Kabul, or you will have to allow us to do it." So basically, he said, here's how this is going to work out. Either you take care of Kabul, we'll let you control Kabul, or you have to let us do it. And so what Patterson says here is that Mackenzie understood his mission to be, quote, "only to evacuate American citizens, Afghan allies, and others at risk." And so he writes, "And in a breathtaking moment of intellectual myopia, the general explained that he just needed the airport to do that." So Baradar, so just to review, Baradar comes at him and says, "Look, all this violence is going on. You can either, you guys can take care of this. You can take control of Kabul until you guys get out, or you can let us control Kabul, and we'll make sure everything runs right. We'll crack down on the violence." And so Mackenzie said, "Well, all we need is the airport, and everything else will be okay." He got played, guys. Our general got played. And I understand that he understood his mission only to be to evacuate our allies and American citizens and others who are at risk. But he wasn't thinking beyond what that mission was. And this is according to Patterson. I'm not a military expert. I rely on military experts, but I'm not one. But this was... Patterson calls this a stroke of pure genius on the part of Baradar. Not admiring the guy, but he played him again, because this resulted in a situation, and they did agree to this. On the spot, an understanding was reached according to two other U.S. officials. The United States could have the airport until August 31st, but the Taliban would control the city of Kabul. And and again, it probably would have required them to put more troops in the city to make sure things went swimmingly. But again, they said, no, we got to stick to our deadline. We got to get people out, so we can't send in more troops. So let's let the Taliban control the city. Allowing the Taliban to control the city is what is resulting in a lot of people being stranded, because they guess who they have to get by to actually get to the Kabul airport to be able to fly out. They have to go through Taliban checkpoints. And we already know that the Taliban was going door to door, looking on people's devices to see if there was content in English or messages or communications in English to bust people. They already killed people that they found to have assisted the U.S. military while we were there. And we allowed them to do this by allowing them to have control of the city. We should have said, no. We're going to control Kabul. You guys stay out, do your thing. We're going to get everybody out. Then you can do what you want. And again, nobody likes the fact that the Taliban is taking over, right? But again, this was always going to happen. I will defend Biden on that, because there's nothing he can do about it other than leaving our troops there, which is not an option at this point. So when I read this article, I was like, a lot of this just sounds like common sense. I know I don't understand all the ins and outs of how the military works, which is why I rely on people like Dave Patterson and other people that I've read. But it just seems like this would have been common sense. And maybe I don't know if Mackenzie just trusted the Taliban, or if maybe he thought it would be in their best interest not to act up. And I get that you can't always think of every single eventuality, but I'm sorry, this is what you're being paid for. This is what taxpayers are paying you for. So again, the first issue was just being more concerned with getting out by the deadline than we were about making sure that civilians and allies were out first. The second was to withhold air support, and that decision was made as early as June. And then the third was giving up Bagram Air Base because that slowed down our ability to get people out. And then the fourth was allowing the Taliban to control Kabul. So it's just, you can see the series of these mistakes. And again, like I said, if they had just made the first mistake, but maybe if they didn't make the last three, then yeah, there would have been some roadblocks, there would have been some bumps in the road, but we still, I think this still would have gone off a lot more effectively. And again, those 13 soldiers would not be dead. The reason why those soldiers were dead is because we had to send them back in there in the first place. We allowed the Taliban to take back over, even though we knew that they were going to. We didn't do anything to slow them down. And we allowed the Taliban to control the city because, I mean, who's to say that the Taliban didn't let these people in there on purpose? It's not like the Taliban are good people. Yeah, ISIS-K is worse than the Taliban, and they do dislike each other. They are at war with one another. But, you know, the enemy of my enemy, right? They both don't like us. So who's to say that the Taliban didn't let them through? So, they probably did, right? So it's like at every step of the way, we mess this up. And like I said, the Pentagon said that about as many as 250 Americans who wanted to leave Kabul are stranded. And, you know, the Biden administration is saying, you know, we're going to be in contact with these people. We're going to get them out. I don't know how they're going to do that. If they do, then great. Then that will go towards, you know, rectifying some of the mistakes that happened. I hope those people are able to get out. I do not believe for a second that there are not a lot of Americans there who wanted to get out but couldn't. I mean, when Biden gave his remarks today, he said that they were warned multiple times. I don't believe that either. I'm going to look into that, by the way. I'm going to see if that's true, if he actually did warn people. Because in his speech, he was victim blaming, in a sense. He was implying that it was their fault. It was a very defensive speech. It didn't start out that way because people were saying, oh, he sounds so angry. I'm like, I don't think he sounds angry at all. But then later in the speech, then it kind of came out a little bit more. And he was very defensive. And they're saying that, you know, they were given warning after warning after warning. I don't buy it because, again, they've already lied about this. So I've got trust issues with them now, right? and it really, if we had focused on removing them in the first place before getting the troops out, it wouldn't have been an issue. Then I could say if people chose to stay, then yeah, that is their fault. But that was not our focus. Our focus was just getting out by the 31st. So General Frank McKenzie, he said, quote, there's a lot of heartbreak associated with this departure. We did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out. He also said, but I think if we stayed another 10 days, we wouldn't have gotten everybody out, and there still would have been people who would have been disappointed. Yeah, I mean, I could buy that. I mean, I'm sure even if he did this perfectly, I think that there probably would have been some people stranded there, and hopefully we would have gotten them out later. No, none of the stuff ever goes perfectly, right? And we can't expect perfection. At the same time, this could have gone a lot better. And with Biden's remarks today, I mean, he implied that some of this was Trump's fault. It's not, because nothing that Trump did influenced any of those 4 mistakes that I made. That has nothing to do with it. Doesn't mean that Trump is perfect, but that ain't his fault, y'all. It's not. And on top of that, Biden also, during his remarks, he used the tactic that he's been using over and over again. Whenever he receives criticism for how he handled this withdrawal, he pretends that he's getting criticism from people who want us to stay there. Like he keeps debunking the reason why we should have left, or he keeps debunking the argument that we should stay there. Nobody wants to stay in Afghanistan, though. So it's a straw man. He's rebuking an argument that most people aren't even making. And of course, he's doing it to deflect because he knows he jacked this up. So what do you guys think of this whole thing? I know we've been talking about Afghanistan a lot, but I mean, it's an important issue, right? What do we got here? Good question. Brown Mamba, is a bad withdrawal worse than no withdrawal? No, I don't think so. No. We needed to get out of there. I mean, we need to pull our troops from other countries too. We talked about this last week. I don't really see why we need troops in Germany and Japan. I don't see the reason for it. Maybe somebody knows. I mean, maybe there's a way that it benefits us that I just don't know about. I'm open to that argument, but I don't really see why. We needed to get out of there. And yes, a bad withdrawal is better than not withdrawing at all and keeping our troops there. Question, how do we go from 10,000 to 15,000 Americans in Afghanistan 2 weeks ago, yet only have 200 to 300 Americans left, yet only evacuated less than 6,000 Americans? I have no idea. The bottom line, though, but what the administration did say, though, is that they actually don't know exactly how many Americans are still there or Afghan allies. That they were never really able to give us a number. That 200 number is just an estimate. I think it's probably more. We're not going to know until later. Now, I do know that they were flying people out. There was a point in this whole thing where they actually did get it together and they were having regular flights out of that airport. So I'm not saying everything went wrong. I mean, we did get 122,000 people out. So at some point they did get it together and they were getting people out. But again, if this had been planned better from the beginning, one, they wouldn't have to have done it in such a rush. They could have taken their time a bit. And I actually would have been okay with that. If they said, you know what, we're leaving Afghanistan, but it's going to take a while because we're not going to take our troops out until we get every American out and every Afghan ally out. I would have been willing to wait. Like, I was never into this whole, no, just leave, just up and leave and just, screw the consequences. There are people out there like that. And I know some of my libertarians, you guys just wanted to rip the Band-Aid off. No, there's a way that these things have to be done. So I would have been okay with that. And I think most people would have been, because now we're at least seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and nobody wants to leave our people there who don't want to be there. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly. The numbers are very confusing at this point. But again, I think we're going to know more as stuff comes out. All right. Brown Mamba, I think us being there for 20 years, which included almost 50,000 civilian deaths and over $2 trillion spent, is far worse than a bad withdrawal. Yep, I agree. Question, do you think that General McKenzie made that decision without input from the White House? Now, I'm assuming you're talking about the decision to allow the Taliban to control Kabul. You know what? From the way it was written, it sounds like he didn't. It sounds like he had his mission objective in mind. His marching orders were to get people out by the 31st, and he was thinking that this was the best way to do that. And if we were to take over Kabul ourselves until we got out, it might require sending more troops in, which might make it harder to hit that deadline. But again, that was yet another reason why that deadline shouldn't have even been a thing. I mean, I know the Taliban want that to be the deadline, but since when did they tell us what to do? I mean, yeah, again, that was just another mistake. But it sounds like he didn't allow the Taliban to control Kabul because the White House told him to. But that could have happened. I'm not exactly sure. I'm just kind of going off of the way it was written. Let's see. Good question. Did anyone else notice how Republicans were calling for Biden to be impeached for ending the war, but not when he illegally bombed Syria twice? Well, they can't, because if they did, because they didn't do that when Trump bombed Syria. So that wasn't going to work. And by the way, they're not going to impeach Biden. That's not going to happen. I'm not sure. This shows incompetence, but this isn't high crimes and misdemeanors. I don't think that Biden was intentionally handling this badly, right? I mean, I think his team just made bad decisions. I think he didn't listen to people who had opposing views because, as I mentioned last week, a lot of people on his staff were saying that they were afraid to bring up objections. So yeah, they're not going to impeach him. I know they introduced articles of impeachment. It's silly. I mean, if it's got Marjorie Taylor Greene involved, then yeah, it's going to be silly. It usually is. And here's my other thing. I mean, you want to remove Biden? Okay, you know who we're going to get, right? You know who's going to take over, right? Kamala Harris. That's going to be worse. And no, we're not going to be able to impeach her too. So it's silly. I mean, Biden will step down before we're able to impeach him. I do know that I do understand people want to do it because that's what they did to Trump, and I'm like, why waste the time and money? Like it's dumb. I don't think we need to be fixating on impeaching Biden. I think that's just a few people who are doing that. And like I said, Marjorie Taylor Greene does this stuff to get attention. So I think it's just going to be that pack of Republicans who just want to make it look like they're fighting that will push for this. Let's see. Should we pull out of South Korea? Now, you might be able to convince me that we should stay in South Korea. I still lean towards getting out, but that's a situation where I could kind of understand because you've got North Korea. South Korea is our ally. And if stuff goes down, they're going to need our help. And having South Korea fall would impact us in a negative way. So you might be able to... I've seen your questions, Daniel. I think it sounds like you want our troops to be in these places, which that's fine. There are valid arguments for that. You might be able to convince me on this one because I can kind of see why. But I will tell you that a lot of South Koreans don't want us there either. So I don't know. That is a very good question. Omega variant question. Biden administration obviously wants us to forget about the stranded. Do you believe people will? No, they won't. At least not anytime soon. The fact that people are stranded there is going to be a news story. And the fact that the media is actually doing their jobs in this instance and they're actually reporting critically on the administration for this, we're not going to forget about those people anytime soon. And if Republicans are smart, they will make sure that we don't forget, especially if and when they take back Congress in 2022. Because when that happens, I mean, you see the Democrats doing investigations on January 6th, you better believe we're going to have some House Select committees to investigate this if Republicans take control of the House again. And they should, frankly. I mean, I know they're going to have some hearings within the next few weeks or so, or next couple months to, speak with Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, and then some other folks on this issue to see what happened. But it's a Democrat-controlled Congress, so they're not going to get all that serious about it. But when Republicans take over, they do need to investigate this to see how this went down. Since the withdrawal, the media has been the worst I've ever seen. Warmongers on every station. I would be curious to find out what you're watching. I mean, because and here's the thing, I don't watch cable news. It's trash, guys. I'm sorry, I don't watch it. I will read it. I will read Fox News. I will read CNN, MSNBC. I will look at different clips, but I don't typically have it on. Maybe at some point I will. Maybe while I'm working, I'll just have it on in the background to see if anything pops up. But a lot of it is it's just not. But from what I'm seeing of the media, I'm seeing a lot of reports from like the New York Times, Washington Post, even the Atlantic, other outlets like that, and they're criticizing them. So I'd be curious to see what you're watching. Now, again, they could be criticizing them because they are warmongers. So that would be a point. But yeah, from what I'm seeing, they're not covering for him the way they normally do. Rachel T. Right, like why on earth would we impeach? Oh yeah, theatrics. Yeah, that's all it is. It's theatrics. And it was when the Democrats did it too. I don't believe for a second that they actually thought they were going to impeach Trump. Both times. Let's see. All right. So I'm going to move on. And there's a lot more that I could have talked about with Afghanistan, but I'm thinking that a lot of those, well, actually, no, I don't think that this issue is going to calm down anytime soon because now we have to see what the fallout is. Today was the last day of the deadline. We're going into September tomorrow. I think this will last throughout the month of September because there's going to be stuff that happens. I don't know what it is, but I'll be keeping an eye on it. Now, before I move on, just want to remind you to head on over to libertynation.com. Again, a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. You can take a look at the daily briefing. You can go to the member zone. You can also check out the latest, in cutting edge conservative news and commentary and analysis. And again, this article that I was quoting from, you got to read it. It's very informative. Again, he goes into a little bit more detail than what I did here, but I would encourage you to read all of his articles on Afghanistan. Very informative stuff, whether you agree or not. And also we also have a lot of analysis on the issues of the day. Again, you're going to get angles that you're not used to seeing, because Liberty Nation doesn't just, parrot the same lines that other right-leaning media outlets do. So definitely check out libertynation.com, because I think you'll really appreciate it. But the last thing I want to talk about here is the media and American attitudes on the media. Now, we have a huge political divide right now, right? Our nation is probably at one of the most divided points in our history. And I say that not being somebody who believes that there was ever a point where we were all united. I mean, throughout America's history, we have been divided. Every country is. We might coalesce around something that happens, like if a 9/11 happens, or World War II, something like that. Then there's more unity. But even then, we're still going to argue. We're still going to have different viewpoints. And since we have the First Amendment, at least right now we have it, there will always be people who have differing opinions. But right now, the divide is very pronounced, and it's a little bit worrisome. Now, a lot of this has to do with the media, and you guys know I love bashing the media. Not all of it. I mean, there are plenty of people in the media, myself included, hopefully, that try to be honest about things that are going on. But a lot of the media on both sides is basically just there to have us at each other's throats and not really take time to consider what we're being told. If you're on the right, you are automatically going to trust conservative news sources. If you're on the left, same thing. You're going to trust more left-leaning news sources. But there was a time when the media at least tried to be objective. There was always a bias. I mean, and anybody who's on the right knows this, and from decades ago. I mean, there's always a bias, and we always complain, oh, the media is biased. But there was a Pew Research poll that just came out, and it says that trust in the media among conservatives and Republicans has plummeted. And here's the thing, and I mean, this is over the past 5 years, they've realized that Republicans' trust in media has taken a serious dive. Now, nobody's watching this is going to be surprised by this, because my audience is mostly conservative, and I'm sure you've experienced that. We didn't trust the media that much before, but over the past 5 years, we've seen what they've done. Now, here's what I'm concerned about with the shift in attitudes on the media, which, by the way, there are polls showing that Democrats don't trust the media as they used to. This particular poll does not show that, but there have been others that do. But it seems to be a harbinger for a shift in our society that I'm concerned about, and that could have ramifications in the future. And I'm not talking about 10, 20 years from now. I'm talking about year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years from now. Now, the Pew Research poll, it revealed the extent to which trust in the media has taken a dive since 2016. And the report says, quote, the percentage of Republicans with at least some trust in national news organizations has been cut in half. It dropped from 70% in 2016 to 35% in 2021. Now, the report also says, quote, nearly 8 in 10 Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents say they have either a lot or some trust in the information that comes from national news organizations. So these would be like your establishment media outlets. Again, your Fox News, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, all that stuff, CBS, ABC, all of that. And their trust is 43% higher than Republicans and Republican-leaning independents. Now, Pew Research says that, quote, this partisan gap is the largest of any time that this question has been asked since 2016. And the gap is even wider between liberal Democrats, so leftists, and conservative Republicans, not moderates. It's 53-point difference. With left-leaning Democrats, it's 83%. With right-leaning Republicans, it's 30%. Now, again, it shows that attitudes towards the media have remained relatively static among Democrats. Although I do kind of have some doubts about that because, again, I've seen other polls over the years that suggest that Democrats, they still trust the media more than Republicans do. So don't get me wrong on that. But even their trust has dropped. Now, when it comes to overall trust in the media, and this includes everybody, or Republicans and Democrats and independents, it found that 58% of Americans have at least some trust in the information that comes from national news organizations. So that's almost 60%. But the report also says, quote, this is the smallest share over the past 5 years that this question was asked. Now, here's what's interesting. Americans in general, Republican and Democrat, indicated that they do have more trust in their local news outlets. About 75% indicated that they had at least some trust in reporting that comes from their local news outlets. That tracks, right? I think in general, we always find local media to be less biased than the national media. Now, I'm not saying that they're not biased too, because I mean, I'm in Austin and I consume local media and it's biased in the way that you would expect being Austin. But I would still, but even with that, I would still trust them over CNN. I would trust the Austin American-Statesman more than I would trust CNN. And then when it comes to social media, you're not going to be surprised by this, but trust in information that comes from social media is very low. Only 27% of Americans said they had some trust in social media sites. The report says, quote, this is about on par with late 2019, when 26% said they had at least some trust, but somewhat lower than the 34% who said the same in 2016. Yeah, guys, don't just believe what you see on social media. I know it's tempting. And I think most of us know that, as indicated by this poll. But yeah, social media for me is a good place to get leads. Like if somebody says something on social media, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to go look that up to see, what's going on. And by the way, always be suspicious of people who make claims on Twitter without including a link. Because a lot of times they're not really telling you the truth. I'm just saying. I mean, you guys know me with my breaking whatever tweets. You guys know that satire when I put breaking in front of a tweet. You guys know I'm joking. But some people will put that and they'll actually try to tell you something that isn't true. If there's no link, then you should doubt it immediately. And if you're interested in the story, go ahead and look it up. You're going to find that either they were just straight out lying or that the story is true, but not what they're portraying it to be. All right, that's just a little side note there. Now, again, the results of this poll are no surprise when it comes to conservatives, right? I mean, we saw what the media did once Trump was elected. And I don't care whether you like Trump or not. I get it. I mean, you guys know where I stand. If he does something that I like, I'll call it out. If he does something that I hate, I'll call that out too. That's how I am with every president. So I'm never loyal to any politicians. Like that Chris Brown song, this Jeff ain't loyal. Yeah, I don't care who it is. Even if I like the politician, I'm still going to call balls and strikes because that's how we should be when it comes to these people. They work for us. They're not our friends. They're not celebrities, whatever. So, but the way the press behaved when Trump, even before Trump actually won the election in 2016, they threw off all pretense of objectivity in how they covered him. They were, and in general, they're more aggressive towards Republicans and Democrats. But with Trump triggered them. Trump broke them, and that's when they became full-on activists, and that's why I call them the activist media, because they're there to propagandize, not to inform. And they would publish false report after false report about Trump, and just blatantly lie about him. And the thing about Trump is that he gave them enough ammo to where they didn't have to lie. I mean, Trump said a lot of stupid shit, and there were some things that he did that weren't good. You don't need to make stuff up about him. You don't need to lie, but they did anyway. That's how they work. But again, they were far more extreme over the past 5 years that there's no way that people on the right would trust them less now than they did back in 2016. Now, here's what's interesting about the study. Again, it's only measuring trust in national media. This does not mean that conservatives don't trust any media or that they don't trust any outlet. Right now, we have the advent of alternative media that's been cropping up over the past 10, 15, 20 years with the internet. With the Internet of Things, it has allowed more different types of media. In some ways, that has been great. In some ways, it's been not so great. But we are, on the right, we are more likely to consume a lot of our media online. And again, when it comes to cable news outlets especially, if you look at the demographic makeup of who actually watches CNN, Fox News, ABC, it's people who are 60 years old and up. Most people my age and younger or around our age, like we're not watching CNN like that or Fox News. I just said I don't really watch cable news. But I will read it. I will go online to get my news. I will go to CNN on their website. I will go to Vox. I'll go to obviously Red State, Daily Caller, Daily Wire, LibertyNation.com. And alternative media has exploded because it's allowed conservatives to have the means by which they could subvert the influence of the establishment media outlets, most of which are left-leaning. So we're consuming podcasts. Podcasts are alternative media. What I'm doing right now on YouTube, this is alternative media. This isn't mainstream. And also news sites that they trust. Now, what this is doing is this is bringing in a paradigm shift in which news reporting is becoming even more siloed than it was before. Even before, beyond 5 years ago, it was siloed because, again, the media was biased, but they weren't to the point where I would call them activists. They were just biased towards the left, and we just all knew it, and we just knew how to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? But now that the media has taken this turn, because they haven't stopped. I mean, even though Trump is out of office, they haven't stopped. Yes, they are doing their job when it comes to Biden and Afghanistan, but in every other issue, they will defend him. They will act as his allies. As this shift is becoming more pronounced, I think it's going to contribute to the political division that we're experiencing right now. Now, in general, I'm white-pilled on this. I think over time, that divide will be healed to a certain extent, but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And the fact that we're all retreating ever so gradually into our echo chambers is going to contribute to that. Because like I said, on both sides, whether it's alternative media or mainstream, there are people who are fully invested in making you hate the other side. These people are fully invested in making you think that the crazy nut jobs on the opposite side represent the whole. And they do it in a way that makes us forget, no, most regular people are just regular people. They might disagree with you politically, but they're not hateful, evil people. Not everybody on the left is a commie. Not everybody on the right is a fascist. Not everybody is racist. But again, there are people who are invested in making people believe that everybody's racist. And there are people on the right who engage in similar behavior. So if we keep retreating into these silos, which by the way, now we have to do because the media doesn't even pretend or even try to be objective, then that's going to create more of a problem. At least before, again, even though there was bias, we could still read between the lines. We could still watch some of the same content and come away with at least a common understanding of things that are happening and just disagree on the details and stuff like that. Now we can't do that. We have to disagree on everything. And both sides will lie by omission. If you're looking at a right-leaning media source, they're going to leave out stuff that the left might report because it doesn't comport with the narrative that they want to give you. Same thing happens on the left. Like you look at what happened with the Covington kids. They didn't make that situation up. They just cut out part of that footage to make you think that these kids had swarmed this Native American dude and were yelling at him. Then when the whole footage came out, then you understood that they lied to you by omission. They both do this. They both do this. So if we're only consuming media that agrees with us politically, it's going to make this problem worse. We're not going to be listening to each other. again, this media environment that we're in right now, it doesn't exactly reward people for emphasizing civil conversations. Even though I think that people are hungry for it, it doesn't reward it. I was just talking to some friends of mine on Twitter, and and she was complaining about, it was Mrs. Pinky. She was talking about how people will just say these extreme things without understanding the nuance, or they'll take these positions that ignore a lot of facts, and it's just designed to make people outraged. And I said it's because it's hard to be nuanced and reasonable and still get the same number of clicks. That's the position I'm in. I refuse to engage in a lot of that. Some things are actually worth being outraged over, don't get me wrong. And I do think that there are evil people on the left, just like there are evil people on the right. But not everybody's evil. Not everybody's a commie. Not everybody's a socialist. And it's hard to get those clicks. Or it's not hard to get clicks by being reasonable. It's just hard to get as many clicks as the people who are more invested in making us angry. I think it can still be done. But again, as the focus continues to be more towards sensationalism and less on rational, intelligent conversations that are done civilly, even if it gets heated, you can have a civil conversation that gets heated. But that's not what people are incentivizing right now. And again, a lot of that is our fault because we're the ones who watch it. We give them those clicks. So it's a cycle, and it's destructive, and it's something that I've complained about quite a bit. But how do we deal with this? Well, the way you're only responsible for yourself, right? So if you want to avoid falling into that trap, it's simple. Don't just read the sources that agree with you. Read the ones that don't agree with you. Even if it's biased, you can still get something from it that you won't get from the ones that agree with you. Because again, you should just assume, and again, I don't think they're always doing this intentionally. I think most of the time they're not. But they're always going to leave stuff out that doesn't comport with their narrative. And the only way you can be fully informed and understand an issue fully is by reading both sides. And doing that has actually helped shape the way I think about a lot of things. If everybody did that, then this stuff wouldn't matter. But since everything is so siloed now, it's either right-leaning news or left-wing news. There's not a whole lot in the center anymore. I mean, you've got like Reuters. It still leans left, but it's not crazy left. I actually like The Hill. So if you're a conservative watching this, which you probably are, check out Reuters. I like to read The Hill. I like Politico. Politico is very much on the left, but they're not as crazy with it as, say, like a Mother Jones. And I would still read about Mother Jones, even if it's just to find something to rebut. I mean, it's good to be more well-rounded. And it's funny, I was with my dad a couple of weeks ago. I'd flown out to LA for a funeral, and we were talking about this. I mean, and my dad's side of the family is mostly Democrats, right? I might be the only one who leans right. But we were talking about my grandfather, his dad, and he used to watch Fox News, and people would be like, wait, why are you watching that Fox News? And he's like, I like to get both sides. That's reasonable. You should always want to get both sides. You don't have to agree with everything. But a lot of times people think that certain ideas are left and right, and some of them are, but not everything is left and right. Like say, police brutality. Disagreeing with police brutality and wanting to hold officers accountable, that is not a left-wing belief. That's not a right-wing belief. That's just a belief. You can be a conservative and say, yeah, police shouldn't be targeting people on the color of their skin, whether it's implicit, whether it's an unconscious bias or what have you, or just a bias in the system or whatever. That shouldn't be happening. There's nothing inherently left-wing about that. It's just you either believe that or you don't. And if you don't, you can have, your arguments as to why. Or like the death penalty. I'm against the death penalty. But I'm against the death penalty for conservative reasons. We need to get out of this mindset that everything is either right or it's left. Sometimes it just is. Take an issue as it is and say, I agree with that, or I don't agree with it, or I agree with some of it, or I disagree with a lot of it, or whatever. People don't think that way, which is why some people on the right will say, oh, well, you're just a lefty. Oh, you're on the left. You're not really conservative. And then I shut them up by asking what left-wing policies I support. They can't answer that. I've never gotten an answer to that, and I never will, because I don't support left-wing policies. But your attitudes don't necessarily have to be left or right. I don't know if that's making sense. But I am concerned about where this is going, and I see that the only way to really combat it is to get out of our echo chambers. And I don't know how we get people to do that, but it's got to happen. And for this whole divide to heal, again, we're always going to have division. We're always going to be divided. But to have it not be so pronounced, we've got to get people willing to get outside of their echo chambers and not be so married to their narratives. Because when that happens, then we'll just believe whatever makes us feel good, and we won't be able to get to the truth, and we won't be able to get to a point where we can work these problems out, even though we disagree. All right, does that make sense? What do you guys got to say? I want to talk more about this. I want to dive into this topic a little bit more at some point, because I do think that this is important for our society and for our culture. Let's see. Hey, what's up, Trisha? You joined. Dang, you guys had a lot to say here. Brown Mama, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, CBS are criticizing him because they want to stay in Afghanistan. They criticized him and Trump, and even before the withdrawal was done, because they said we should get out. I think there's truth to that. I've seen that. And even when it was getting closer to when Biden was going to withdraw, I did see a lot of reports talking about how the women are going to suffer and everything's going to go to hell. I saw that, and I know why they wrote those reports. Let's see. I'd also like to be able to trust these pollsters. There are too many people not being polled for these important stats. Yeah, that's why I will, if it's just one poll saying something, I usually won't mess with it. I want to see what other polls say about the same topic. That's why it's good to rely on multiple polls rather than just one or two. Yeah, that's a good point. My dad is an establishment Democrat. He was surprised when I told him that the media has an agenda and will distort things to fit their narrative. He responded with, quote, "They're just giving the news." Yeah, you hear that a lot from establishment Democrats. They think it's just normal news because, again, they don't get the other side. If they watch conservative media and the regular news, then they'll know, oh, okay, there is a slant here. They may still agree with it, but still, they think that these news outlets are actually just giving it to them straight, and they're not. Let's see. Hey, what does everybody have against us boomers? I love boomers. I just don't like the way some of y'all think about certain things. But, at some point I'll be a boomer or in that same class, so whatever. It's all right. Boomers are fine. My mom is from the World War II generation. I have begged her to stop watching cable news. Yeah, I mean, I get it can be entertaining, and a lot of it is entertainment, but I just don't get much from it. I mean, maybe during the day I might watch it, but at the nighttime shows, I don't know. It's just not my thing. Like, I'm not into Sean Hannity. I'm not into Rachel Maddow. Definitely not into Tucker Carlson. Like, I can handle Sean Hannity. I'll watch him every now and then if he's on and I feel like watching him. I'm not a fan of Tucker Carlson. I haven't really gotten into that, but I agree with some of the things that he says, but it's just not my thing. All right. Okay. Yes, the boomer mentality is a dig at millennials who do the same thing. Oh, man. Tucker 2024. I will vote for AOC over Tucker Carlson. Probably not, but still. Yeah, I'm not a fan. Not a fan. And yeah, we don't need to be trying to make him president either, guys. If you guys are going to go for Tucker, let's just do DeSantis. Well, I have my concerns about DeSantis. I'd much rather have DeSantis than Tucker Carlson. I mean, Tucker isn't even conservative on a lot of things, so I don't get the appeal. But whatever, teach his own. But yeah, I think I'm going to stop there. But again, thank you guys for coming. Again, please like and share this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, keep your minds free.